Chapter 3. All this that takes so long to describe became apparent to me in a few seconds. What I had always despised ascended the throne. But with the finding of Bassett's cottage as a signpost close to home, my former sang-froid, my stupidity, would doubtless return, and my relief was therefore considerable when at length a faint gleam of light appeared through the mist, against which the square dark shadow of the chimney line pointed upwards. After all, I had not strayed so very far out of the way. Now I could definitely ascertain where I was wrong. Quickening my pace, I scrambled over a broken stone wall, and almost ran across the open bit of grass to the door. One moment the black outline of the cottage was there in front of me, and the next, when I stood actually against it, there was nothing. I laughed to think how utterly I had been deceived. Yet not utterly, for as I groped back again over the wall, the cottage loomed up a little to the left, with its windows lighted and friendly, and I had only been mistaken in my angle of approach after all. Yet again, as I hurried to the door, the mist drove past and thickened a second time, and the cottage was not where I had seen it. My confusion increased a lot after that. I scrambled about in all directions, rather foolishly hurried, and over countless stone walls, it seemed, and completely dazed as to the true points of the compass. Then suddenly, just when a kind of despair came over me, the cottage stood there solidly before my eyes, and I found myself not 2 feet from the door. Was ever mist before so deceptive? And there, just behind it, I made out the row of pines like a dark wave breaking through the night. I sniffed the wet resinous odor with joy, and a genuine thrill ran through me as I saw the unmistakable yellow light of the windows. At last I was near home, and my troubles would soon be over. A cloud of birds rose with shrill cries off the roof, and whirled into the darkness when I knocked with my stick on the door, and human voices, I was almost certain, mingled somewhere with them, though it was impossible to tell whether they were within the cottage or outside. It all sounded confusedly with the rush of air like a little whirlwind, and I stood there rather alarmed at the clamor of my knocking. By way, too, of further proof that my imagination had awakened, the significance of that knocking at the door set something vibrating within me that most surely had never vibrated before, so that I suddenly realized with what atmosphere of mystical suggestion is the mere act of knocking surrounded. Knocking at a door, both for him who knocks, wondering what shall be revealed on opening, and for him who stands within, waiting for the summons of the knocker. I only know that I hesitated a lot before making up my mind to knock a second time. And anyhow, what happened subsequently came in a sort of haze. Words and memory both failed me when I tried to record it truthfully, so that even the faces are difficult to visualize again, the words almost impossible to hear. Before I knew it, the door was open, and before I could frame the words of my first brief question, I was within the threshold, and the door was shut behind me. I had expected the little dark and narrow hallway of a cottage, oppressive of air and odor, but instead I came straight into a room that was full of light and full of people, and the air tasted like the air about a mountain-top. To the end, I never saw what produced the light, nor understood how so many men and women found space to move comfortably to and fro, and each pass each other as they did, within the confines of those 4 walls. An uncomfortable sense of having intruded upon some private gathering was, I think, my first emotion, though how the poverty-stricken countryside could have produced such an assemblage puzzled me beyond belief. And my second emotion, if there was any division at all in the wave of wonder that fairly drenched me, was feeling a sort of glory in the presence of such an atmosphere of splendid and vital youth. Everything vibrated, quivered, shook about me, and I almost felt myself as an aged and decrepit man by comparison. I know my heart gave a great fiery leap as I saw them, for the faces that met me were fine, vigorous, and comely, while burning everywhere through their ripe maturity shone the ardors of youth and a kind of deathless enthusiasm. Old, yet eternally young, they were, as rivers and mountains count their years by thousands, yet remain ever youthful. And the first effect of all those pairs of eyes lifted to meet my own was to send a whirlwind of unknown thrills about my heart, and make me catch my breath with mingled terror and delight. A fear of death, and at the same time a sensation of touching something vast and eternal that could never die, surged through me. A deep hush followed my entrance as all turned to look at me. They stood, men and women, grouped about a table, and something about them, not their size alone, conveyed the impression of being gigantic, giving me strangely novel realizations of freedom, power, and immense existence more or less than human. I can only record my thoughts and impressions as they came to me, and as I dimly now remember them. I had expected to see old Tom Bassett crouching half asleep over a peat fire, a dim lamp on the table beside him, and instead this assembly of tall and splendid men and women stood there to greet me, and stood in silence. It was little wonder that at first the ready question died upon my lips, and I almost forgot the words of my own language. "I thought this was Tom Bassett's cottage," I managed to ask at length, and looked straight at the man nearest me across the table. He had wild hair falling about his shoulders, and a face of clear beauty. His eyes, too, like all the rest, seemed shrouded by something veil-like that reminded me of the shadowy man of whom I had first inquired the way. They were shaded, and for some reason I was glad they were. At the sound of my voice, unreal and thin, there was a general movement throughout the room, as though everyone changed places, passing each other like those shapes of fluid sort I had seen outside in the mist. But no answer came. It seemed to me that the mist even penetrated into the room about me, and spread inwardly over my thoughts. "Is this the way to the manor house?" I asked again, louder, fighting my inward confusion and weakness. "Can no one tell me?" Then apparently everyone began to answer at once, or rather, not to answer directly, but to speak to each other in such a way that I could easily overhear. The voices of the men were deep, and of the women wonderfully musical, with a slow rhythm like that of the sea, or of the wind through the pine trees outside. But the unsatisfactory nature of what they said only helped to increase my sense of confusion and dismay. "Yes," said one, "Tom Bassett was here for a while with the sheep, but his home was not here." "He asks the way to a house when he does not even know the way to his own mind," another voice said, sounding overhead, it seemed. "And could he recognize the signs if we told him?" came in the singing tones of a woman's voice close behind me. And then, with a noise more like running water or wind in the wings of birds than anything else I could liken it to, came several voices together. "And what sort of way does he seek? The splendid way, or merely the easy?" "Or the short way of fools?" "But he must have some credentials, or he could never have got as far as this," came from another. A laugh ran round the room at this, though what there was to laugh at I could not imagine. It sounded like wind rushing about the hills. I got the impression, too, that the roof was somehow open to the sky, for their laughter had such a spacious quality in it, and the air was so cool and fresh, and moving about in currents and waves. "It was I who showed him the way," cried a voice belonging to someone who was looking straight into my face over the table. "It was the safest way for him, once he had got so far." I looked up and met his eye, and the sentence remained unfinished. It was the hurrying, shadowy man of the hillside. He had the same shifting outline as the others now, and the same veiled and shaded eyes, and as I looked, The sense of terror stirred and grew in me. I had come in to ask for help, but now I was only anxious to be free of them all and out again in the rain and darkness on the moor. Thoughts of escape filled my brain, and I searched quickly for the door through which I had entered, but nowhere could I discover it again. The walls were bare, not even the windows were visible, and the room seemed to fill and empty of these figures as the waves of the sea fill and empty a cavern, crowding one upon another, yet never occupying more space or less. So the coming and going of these men and women always evaded me. And my terror became simply a terror that the veils of their eyes might lift, and that they would look at me with their clear, naked sight. I became horribly aware of their eyes. It was not that I felt them evil, but that I feared the new depths in me, their merciless and terrible insight, would stir into life. My consciousness had expanded quite enough for one night. I must escape at all costs and claim my own self again, however limited. I must have sanity, even if with limitations, but sanity at any price. But meanwhile, though I tried hard to find my voice again, there came nothing but a thin piping sound that was like reeds whistling where winds meet about a corner. My throat was contracted, and I could only produce the smallest and most ridiculous of noises. The power of movement, too, was far less than when I first came in, and every moment it became more difficult to use my muscles, so that I stood there, stiff and awkward, face to face with this assemblage of shifting, wonderful people. "And now," continued the voice of the man who had last spoken, "and now the safest way for him will be through the other door, where he shall see that which he may more easily understand." With a great effort I regained the power of movement, while at the same time a burst of anger and a determination to be done with it all and to overcome my dreadful confusion drove me forward. He saw me coming, of course, and the others indeed opened up and made a way for me, shifting to one side or the other whenever I came too near them, and never allowing me to touch them. But at last, when I was close in front of the man, ready both to speak and act, he was no longer there. I never saw the actual change, but instead of a man, it was a woman. And when I turned with amazement, I saw that the other occupants, walking like figures in some ancient ceremony, were moving slowly toward the far end of the room. One by one, as they filed past, they raised their calm, passionless faces to mine, immensely vital, proud, austere, and then, without further word or gesture, they opened the door I had lost and disappeared through it one by one into the darkness of the night beyond. And as they went, it seemed that the mist swallowed them up, and a gust of wind caught them away, and the light also went with them, leaving me alone with the figure who had last spoken. Moreover, it was just here that a most disquieting thought flashed through my brain with unreasoning conviction, shaking my personality, as it were, to the foundations. Namely, that I had hitherto been spending my life in the pursuit of false knowledge, in the mere classifying and labeling of effects, the analysis of results, scientific so-called, whereas it was the folklorist, and such like, who with their dreams and prayers were all the time on the path of real knowledge, the trail of causes, that the one was merely adding to the mechanical comfort and safety of the body, ultimately degrading the highest part of man and never advancing the type, while the other... But then I had never yet believed in a soul, and now was no time to begin, terror or no terror. Clearly, my thoughts were wandering.